Residual, I didn't notice the cold right away. The bed was clean, cool from the evening's air, and the sheets still kept their folded creases. I slid my legs under the quilt, and the fabric whispered like a polite theater crowd, making room. Tom's back faced me, the curve of shoulder under his pajama shirt, familiar as a door in a darkened house. The streetlight put a small, steady pane of amber on the far wall. The window was shut to keep the river wind out. The refrigerator in the kitchen was humming at the responsible pitch it has when day is over and you can pretend machines do the night work for you. I leaned in, the old habit almost unthinking, to kiss the patch of his cheek I could reach. My lips met cloth. The burnished cotton didn't give, a small mistake. I moved closer, cooled lips brushing fabric. His shoulder registered under my palm as a flat cold that immediately sank deeper than skin. I told myself things too quickly. He'd fallen asleep on top of the covers, and the air had cooled him. The house was a degree or two lower than usual because the radiator clicks had sounded uncertain earlier. A winter draft sometimes found that hairline crack by the sash and had spent the day looking for me. I put my mouth to the back of his neck, where I always find a little heat. Stiff, waxy, not a person's. The ridge of muscle that ordinarily lives under his skin had been replaced with something austere and ungiving. I took one breath, and then I took another, because if you do the second one, there is still time to avoid the third, which is when you say the word. I tried to turn him. He had a new weight I didn't recognize as weight because it didn't yield. The bedside lamp made a too hard brightness. The bulb finding its filaments felt like someone turning up the world. Fabrics and the cheap varnish on the dresser and the paperback with the bent cover corner moved forward into a plane I resented. He was cold. He had been cold for hours. I knew it with the same knowledge that lets you read your name upside down at a clerk's desk. The steady breathing I had been listening to was my own, lifted back to me by the hollow of the window and the slight rubbery ring at the bedroom door. The form next to me was the last shape the kind body takes when it doesn't get to keep moving. I backed away without getting off the bed, my thighs working against the sheet like a swimmer trying to make backwards distance. I have the kind of voice that doesn't carry even when I'm alone. "Tom," I said, and I was surprised the room didn't lean in. Habit made me run the list of numbers I'd learned as a nurse 10 years ago. Shock, hypothermia, blood sugar, heart. But I only knew this by study. I haven't worked in a hospital since my 20s. At the clinic, we fill forms more than we fill veins. My hands do the small practicals. Teach a hand to wrap a finger, show a mother how to hold a thermometer under a suspicious tongue, tell a man with a bruise the size of a saucer that time and ice are a kind of medicine, only because they are stubborn. I stood. The floorboards took my feet like they'd been waiting for them. The radiator under the window made one last tick and then pretended to be furniture. The refrigerator hummed reliably. The lamp was wrong. It made a corner of the room too bright and everything else too pliant. The bed's dark bulk gathered my eye by refusing that brightness. I didn't think words like "don't" or "he can't be." My head had slipped under a wave I didn't see. There was a moment where I thought, what did we eat? Did he take anything? Was there a sign? Then the sound of the neighbor's bathroom fan came through the wall and made a kind of reasonable noise that put a limit around how far my thoughts would run. The phone lay on the dresser under a folded receipt and the key tray with our names stuck on the bottom in a board label. The receipt, 2 mugs from the thrift on Hall Street and a towel that was larger than we buy on weekdays, showed up last month because we're trying to be a house with sets. It had been a private joke that we didn't tell anyone, plates that match. And mugs without chips and towels that fold into each other as if they all learned the same trick in the same locker room. The towel hung over the oven handle smelled like clean, and the citrus the laundromat adds to everything now. I stared at the folded paper because the lines meant a clerk had touched them, and when a clerk touches something, the world is reassuringly dull. I called. My fingers became the kind you borrow from someone else for emergencies, articulated in the right places and changeable in length and unable to dial without the app S prompts. The city had moved to a centralized dispatch last summer. There's a pre-recorded instruction before a human speaks, and it said, for fire, medical or police, do not hang up. It was a calm and wrong voice. When the woman answered, she was ordinary, and I continued to breathe. I gave an address. She asked if he was breathing, and I said no because there is no gentler lie. She asked if I wanted to attempt CPR, and here time slowed down into a syrup in which grammar and guilt lived. I said no, and the sound of that word in my mouth made me feel both immediately guilty and immediately kept. He isn't warm, I said. And the word ran ahead and I let it. Keep the door unlocked, she said. Do not leave the apartment. If you feel faint, sit down. Response is on the way. She had a voice you could lean against. I pressed my palm to the wall by the door because I have learned to do a physical act when someone tells me to wait. The wall's paint felt like an old napkin, soft and slightly sticky, like a building you can request indulge you but cannot command. The streetlight made a darker yellow on the rug. I heard our refrigerator finish its cycle and pause. The pause was everything. The knock at the door came less than 10 minutes later, though time had stopped keeping its job very well. I opened the door to a man and a woman, both in navy, both with the tight faces of people who are trained 4 different ways to wonder why you didn't find them sooner. Behind them, a neighbor in socks watched from his threshold with the specific guilt of a person who has been asked to witness something too late. The woman kneeled beside the bed and put 2 fingers under his jaw, where the vein lives, and made a small movement with her hand that means, let me take the exemplar. The man took his wrist. She shook her head the way the experienced shake their heads, not a no exactly, more like a yes that has a hard bottom. I'm sorry, she said. She said my name. I did not remember telling her my name. He lay there while the forms were made and the paper was written on. The woman asked me if Tom had any conditions, and the list I had learned when I was younger scrolled through me and into the place where I had to admit we had never bothered the doctor about his working too much, or the way he sometimes got a chest pain on nights when the plant pushed them to 12-hour shifts. The plant isn't a refinery, not a mill. It is a mixing and packaging facility that likes to call itself the center of town's supply chain. If there is a chain, Tom knew one small, faithful link. The hierarchy there lives in clipboards and handheld scanners, beep after beep after beep, the way a scanner is the voice of a machine that cannot speak in long sentences. Heart, I said. Maybe. The paramedic nodded in a way that acknowledges both your effort and the something that will happen later without you. They waited with me for the police, like the city asks them to. The woman drank water from my chipped mug and apologized for taking it, and I told her our towels were clean, and she laughed because the mouth will make jokes when it needs to. When the officers came, they made kind noises as if they were working in a public place and needed to help the room keep its dignity. I signed something. I signed again. I put my hand for a second on the dresser edge because I needed to rest the pen, and I remembered the receipt under my phone, and I put the pen down and moved the receipt carefully so it would not tear. None of this should matter when a body has stopped, but it is the only thing that stops you. The old radiator clanged twice as if it had a chain inside. They asked if I had someone, and I said, Mara, my sister, and I called her, and she answered at once, because sisters have a way of making you feel they just picked up the phone to call you, and you blessed them because you did not have to be the one to interrupt. I told her where I was, and she said, I'm coming. She lives 12 minutes away in ordinary driving, and the weather was only a small, ridiculous freeze, and the river was behaving. "Wait for me," she said. She didn't say, "Don't make tea," but we have learned a short way of being kind to each other, and that was what she meant. I thought about how it would look to have 2 mugs out. How careless to make something as domestic as tea in a room where Tom had become a thing. But I stalked the kitchen anyway, because ritual is a bridal. The faucet gave a stutter of air and then performed. The water had its faint iron smell. It felt honest. I tried not to watch the little yellow notice I had stuck to the cabinet last month. "Turn off the oven knob after use," in my own angry exclamation point handwriting after I'd come back from the clinic to find gas in the bread smell. The kettle set on the burner. The burner clicked. The flame lived. The refrigerator returned to its duty. An ambulance siren went by 2 streets over. The window had a chalk line where we had set down a ladder last spring to paint and broken our promise to finish the job. Mara came in while they were taping the sheet around the shape of my husband. He was a shape. I suppose he had been one all along. The paramedic woman gave me a look, like the looks I had given as a nurse when a family had made their first mistake and asked permission to leave a foot. And then, while leaving, the foot had excused themselves altogether. "If there are valuables," she said sympathetically. I shook my head at the sheet. The word valuables doesn't mean anything in a room with a body in it and means only everything later. Tom's wedding ring was on the little plate on the dresser where he put it every night because he believed in the danger of working with machines and jewelry. The plate had a tiny printed lemon on it. That had been a joke in a store 10 years ago and is now how we live. The officers left. The paramedics shook my hand. The neighbor closed his door and took his foot off the floor register's edge. I heard the thin rubber flap close with a small insistence. Mara went around the apartment the way she always does, checking the knobs, flipping the kitchen light off and then on, a habit from our childhood when power outages taught us that lights sometimes need coaching to return to their job. "Do you want me to call Mom?" she said, not a question. I nodded and she said, "I will call Mom." I told her where the mug was because she always accidentally chooses Tom's mug, which is taller and too heavy for the way she holds her hand, and which once had a handle, fail under heat and nearly scalded her. We sat at the table with the 2 mugs too close to the edge, and I wiped one ring with my sleeve because I couldn't stand to have the towel catch it. The refrigerator hummed. The plant whistle in my head made its quick 2-second call at 6 a.m., though I knew it would not blow today. Tom's shift sheet hung on the fridge door under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, the company S Lighthouse, not a real one, showing him working nights for the next 2 weeks, 10 to 10. The forms on the table still had the words that belonged to people in uniforms: natural causes, unattended, no evidence of contusion, no evidence of struggle. In my mind, they were words you can break down into bark like a dog. Nat, un-at, ivd, ivid, strug. Underneath, they had written time of discovery. Around 7, the city sent a message. Boil water advisory for Bankside South. Out of an abundance of caution due to a main break near quarry, bring water to a rolling boil for 1 minute before drinking, cooking or brushing teeth. Use bottled water for infants. Allow lines to run clear before use. They always write the last line because it looks like a way to be useful. I started the kettle again, so I would have boiled water on hand. The act of pouring puts an old thing in the hands. Mara looked at me. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, which is what a person should say instead of yes or no when something has removed the floor from beneath the question. Sometimes I think I need someone in the room. Then it changes. "Text me if that changes fast," she said, and I nodded. She wrote on a sticky note and put it by the microwave, as if we lived in a dorm. I fixed the hall light. It had only been a loose shade, and she changed the bulb, and somehow this felt like something done for the dead. We hugged a shape we always do, left shoulders careful, because when we were little we used to bruise that shoulder against door jambs, and you learn the geography of your family's bodies quietly. After she left, I waited for something to ask me to be its hand. Nothing did. The sink dripped twice because I had not turned the handle true. A child on the street shouted and then laughed. I put the towels right in the bathroom because there had been visitors, and when you have visitors, you put towels on the rail as if you drop bread on the table. Tom's toothbrush leant in its cup, the little feathery end of the brush, telling someone else's story about nightly care. It made me want to break things. I rinsed his cup and set it too strongly down for a glass. I couldn't make myself touch the pillow on his side of the bed to set it square, because the smallest thing next to that kind of big thing announced itself like a clown. Sleep sat with me for 5 minutes at noon and looked at me, and then decided I'd done something wrong and took itself away without apology. At 2, I walked to the grocery because being on my feet around strangers is a way to convince my head it isn't thinking. The store makes a delicate static of its own. The fluorescent buzz changes as you move down an aisle. The beeps at self-check beat their chirp song with small variations, depending on who holds the scanner. I stood where I could hear 3 of them, and caught myself taking comfort in the pattern, like a child listening to a clock before a parent comes home. I bought 2 jars of soup and a box of crackers I will not eat, and a small bunch of daffodils, because I'm not a person who thinks flowers are false. I think most things are false, and flowers are the ones that admit it. At the checkout, the woman set my jars on the stainless steel counter, and the clunk made me resettle my mouth. She scanned them, beep the simple mechanical yes for the food and for the day. The receipt printed with the jaunty teeth and cooled, and she tore it and handed it to me. My name printed on the top because I used the discount card we got last year, made me feel the small javelin that ordinary things throw. I put the receipt into my wallet and felt selfish doing it. Traffic lights on Hollow Pike had gone to blinking because a transformer had given up on the far end of Bankside. The men in orange were everywhere in their abnormally clean vests. The town has a siren at the old school that they only use for floods. When they test it, it sounds so human you despise it. They didn't test it. The sky was a clear, hard blue, and the wind made tiny, low-level declarations that you could only hear when you were near the wooden signboards. The laundromat machines had their mouths open, round like owls, and a woman inside was feeding quarters like a prayer. I took the long way home because my body had turned avoidance into a fuel. In the stairwell, the light at the landing had begun to flicker. That stutter at the end a fluorescent makes when it never learned from the start which end the electricity will be persuaded best by. I looked up, and the dust on the fixture's cover had become a geography with tributaries. The stair smelled like old varnish and a specific winter rag. I stood halfway between 2 floors and realized I could hear through the apartment doors this dance of private refrigerators, on and off in their various cycles. On days when I work a shift at the clinic, I don't hear like this. Civilians make a noise all their own. Today, it was machines. Today, it was light and compressor and the little static of a radio somewhere that someone left between stations, so the station and the sound duelled and neither won. That night, Tom's phone lit up on the dresser with the alert noise he set for the plant schedule. He hated the standard tones that came with the device. He went searching for a digital chirp that didn't sound like it belonged to a person. It bleeped at 8. His reminder to leave early if it snowed, a holdover from the way the bridge sometimes iced without telling anyone. We had never moved it. He liked to see it not matter except when it did. The bleep and the light brought me to the dresser like magnets only make quiet things move. I couldn't touch the glass. It pulsed and then gave up. I poured myself water from the kettle I had boiled, and it tasted the way boiled water tastes, like you can feel your tongue learning a new edge. The city sent another message: avoid non-essential water use overnight while we flush the mains. You start to loathe the word non-essential when somebody uses it on you. I poured out the water I hadn't drunk, and the sound of it emptying into the sink felt like a person telling me I was wasteful. When I set the mug on the counter, I made it stop a little short of the ring it had left earlier, the circle of the morning refusing to be completed. At 2, I was awake, and the apartment was a country I could name: the radiator, the refrigerator, the soft whine of a neighbor's router, the click of the small thermostat in the hall, starting itself, the creak in the door toward the bathroom, made when the building takes a breath and wants to know how big it has grown overnight. The shape in the bed was gone. It occurs to me now that if there hadn't been the body at the beginning of the night, the apartment would have been doing exactly what it was doing. But I would have named each thing different. In the morning, sleep propped me up for an hour and then abandoned me. The daffodils lay across the cereal bowl where I had left them like a well-behaved idea. I trimmed them and put them in a jar on the windowsill. The frost had been dragged off the glass with a sleeve by a child. A handprint in negative stayed. I mistakenly took the towel from the oven handle to dry the splash I made, and then I put it back, and the grain of the bar apologized insistently. Mara's text came mid-morning. "I'll pick you up at noon. You must eat something heavy." I didn't argue with her because you cannot talk in a language you don't speak. I don't speak the language that moves appetite. In the car, she looked at the traffic like it offended her. She reads the whole world's mood by the lights and their timing. She drove us to a diner near the plant where the mornings smell like onions and coffee colored with milk into a brown you can walk on. The people there knew us. One of the men looked at me and carefully didn't say how sorry he was, because the best people are afraid to make it worse by making it more real. The booths had that faint squeak that vinyl makes when you change your mind about how close you want to sit to someone. The sugar caddy's handles had been polished 1,000 times by the same rag. I ordered pancakes and ate half a bite and then got angry with myself and ate the rest like I was holding a dare. The waitress called me honey, a word I have a complicated friendship with. The coffee tasted like it had been waiting all night to meet milk. Out the window, you can see the plant side gate, the little guard booth with the slanted roof and the windows streaked on the inside by a man with nothing to do for 20 minutes at 2 in the morning, wiping the star of his breath. The shift schedule taped next to the door had been printed in too small font, and men had written their initials in shapes like they were different species of bird. Tom's T had a long foot. His initials were TW, and sometimes it looked like he was telling the list that it was time, or that he had crossed something out angrily and then smoothed it over into a letter. A forklift beeped somewhere inside the fence. It's cheaper to have a sound than to convince a person to look behind them. "He'll be in their heads forever," Mara said. "He's the guy who signed the extra slots for holidays when other people were at home." She tapped her nail on the rim of her coffee. "He made that place behave for other men." "He hated those nights sometimes," I said, saying it felt like telling the dead the truth about the living, and it made me disloyal. "He knew the way machines breathe," she said, and it made a kind of proud picture in my head. Tom walking through the rows of pallet racks and hearing when the compressor behind the cold room changed its click. He gave them nicknames. Of course he did. He called the old carton sealer Lefty, I said. Everyone thought it was some old union joke. It just veered left. "Sometimes," Mara said, "when a thing breaks, what it really is showing you is what pattern you've used to hold yourself together." I wanted to put my face on the table for a minute. It is hard to be the person other people think is the one who knows how to speak. When your job is to tell a patient that the blood work is fine, but the ache is from the ear, not the organ, you forget how to let your own organs be excused. On the way back to the apartment, we passed a grocery warehouse I never think about because it looks like a shark's back. A man outside wore a vest worked with reflector tape into crosshatches. He stood and smoked in a way that had never lost its appeal to me in college. He looked down at his phone and shook his head, one of those making a joke gestures that is also a "we all knew this one." A truck braked and made the brake salyer S long squeal like a mistake being scraped from a plate. I cried a little, quietly in that small way you do when you forget you're supposed to cry bigger. Mara looked straight ahead as if the road needed her more than I did. At home, we found a notice taped to the door of the building. Shelter in place advisory through midnight. Do not burn candles. Do not run small engines indoors. Close windows. Do not use water except for essential. Smell reported at the river. The city can write the word smell in a way that makes you feel implicated. My phone had the same message from the emergency system. The sirens were the bloom of far away. I shut the windows. I did not stop myself from smelling the air anyway. There is a human rudeness that will always go to the curiosity first. That night, the apartment felt thinner, like I could see how the walls are nothing but lines pretending to be firm. The shelter in place made it into an official condition. The refrigerator seemed too loud. The baseboard heater S clicks sounded like they had been recorded in a studio to make an album about the old sounds of houses. The building S stairwell light went off and then on with the uncertainty of a person at a door deciding whether to ring again. The plant whistle in my head blew at 10 and then at 2 because even if you're home you hear it. And even if it is not the planter's whistle, it is something else 2 neighborhoods over, and you turn yourself to it. Because once you have listened for a sound, you cannot teach yourself to stop. I cleaned one mug and then put it away and then took it out again because I had not decided yet whether I want a house with 2 mugs out or 1 mug only. I folded the towel on the oven handle the way we said we would, thirds, crisp. Then I unfolded it because the fold was suddenly a meanness. I set the daffodils in the hall to watch the door because then someone would be there to watch it. Mara texted, "You awake?" And I didn't answer because sometimes the most generous thing sisters do is not answer. At 1, the sound I had been telling myself I was hearing for 2 nights presented itself in a way small enough to be believable. The whisper of a breath next to me, not the way people breathe in sleep. Tom had had a whistle in the winter when his nose got tired, but the gentler noise of lungs nobody asked permission from to remain. I turned my head, and the dark at shoulder height was darker than the rest by a little, a press of air inside the bed's outline where no body was. I counted. The refrigerator would come on in 3. I felt my own breath begin to shape itself to make it sound as if someone else might tell me to stop. The refrigerator came on. The breath stopped. It was almost funny, the way houses can find jokes to keep us from sending them to the dump. But then the water in the pipes thumped when the city did a flush somewhere in the grid, and the apartment breathed with the building, and the whisper came back under that noise. Not my breath. Not the refrigerator's little valve. Not the neighbor's fan. I said, "Tom?" And the room took that and pressed it to the wall and held it there and did not give it back. The smell arrived next. Not the river's heavy, rotten smell that the city avoids naming in summer. A clean, plastic, almost hospital smell. Not lemon exactly, but the wrong idea of lemon. A bleach rag brought near your face for too long. The towel in the bathroom held it while someone else looked. The water from the faucet came out thin and silver, and then the smell was in the steam rising from the hot side, and in the glass of bottled water we'd bought last week, and in the cotton of my sleeves. It could be grief, I told myself, because grief makes everything smell like old drapes, like clean air trying to pass itself off as something you worked harder for. Round 3, the building made a new kind of quiet. The electricity for our block had done its small time out. The refrigerator stopped without saying so. The stairwell light went dead, and the little exit sign at the end of the hall made an apology. The way it's red sometimes looks like a real color, and sometimes like an idea of a color. I stood in the kitchen and felt insane, and then proud. The silences in buildings are what I understand best. When the power goes, houses revert to something you can love. The shelter in place meant no one would be taking out trash or letting a back screen door slap. I opened the freezer to feel air and accidentally let the cold roll toward me like a too-grown child showing off. The cold on my face stole the first piece of grief I had left. The next day, the city admitted the smell had come from a mixing problem at the plant upriver. Words like plume got used. They avoided chemical names the way we all avoid saying exactly what we mean when anyone else is listening. Tap water okay again, the message said at 9. The shelter lifted. Wear shoes outside, crews working. That last line made something in me sit up. They think like I do. They think about souls. The apartment's surfaces had kept our life while I was in the business of counting. 2 mugs clean enough to be lying on you about how clean they were. 2 towels. A folded receipt for the thrift mugs and the towel we bought for ourselves, like people who make plans. The list of shifts on the fridge like a sea calendar, except we don't have tides in Faircross, only a river that thinks it does sometimes. The little notebook where last summer I had written tide-like notes for the wild blackberries. 4th day after the first real heat is picking day, and I almost laughed because I might as well have been calling the river by a pet name. I wrote Monday on the list on the fridge. I wrote funeral home, and then I put the pen back because writing it had made me breathe wrong. In the afternoon, I walked to the clinic because I needed paperwork and the feeling of hallways that know me. The stairwell at the clinic has a yellow stripe on each step, hand-painted by a maintenance man with honorable intentions 10 years ago, and the smell there is like all the stairwells where someone has hosed after a spill and then forgot to gather up the hose water. In the staff room, the fluorescent fixture made a narrowed whine. The nurses on duty were too kind in their eyes. Martina, the one with the light laughter that never sounds like it's about you, made me tea in a mug that our supply company gave us once at Christmas, and we keep even though the handle is heating wrong. The clinic's old radio sat in the corner playing the scanner quietly. Bursts of static, numbers, the city talking to itself like a person who thinks they're alone in a bathroom. A compressor in the freezer in the back went on, and the smell of soup and plastic went into the now of the air. I felt that smell like a hand pressed gently into the center of my chest. "I don't have appetite," I said. Martina shrugged that nurse shrug that says your appetite is permitted to take leave. "It will return and bring a friend or two," she said, "and then you'll hate it for changing its mind without asking you." She asked nothing that demanded much of my mouth. The barcode scanner at the clinic's little pharmacy station beeped its more humble beep when she checked out a bag of gloves to a doctor who had come in on his day off to sign forms because he is the kind of man who is not allowed to retire. Beep, I thought. Save me. The beeps shall hide me. On my way home, I cut behind the grocery. A hose lay unspooled by the loading dock, still beaded from having been used to wash the bed of a truck. There was a ring of mud under the spigot where the hose had dripped. The smell of the river was in the hose water. I have never learned to not think about that. Downstairs in our building's basement, the laundry sinks at the wall are fed by those same veins. They make the same little exhale, and I have become the woman who hears differences in the exhale and can say, like a doctor proud of a word, aeration. If you say a thing correctly, it gives you fewer choices in the wrong direction. The funeral home had a name I could not say out loud and keep my mouth. I called, and the woman on the phone had braided her hair too tight to keep the day out. You can hear that. We said the usual, the words that endure both because they're easy and because they feel antique. In a room that had had 4 coats of paint, men moved like they were just trying to get a rug through a doorway. Policies were discussed, too much form, and then suddenly there was none, as if they didn't mean for you to know how to be a person in a room together when it mattered. I signed for things. I watched my own name become hard handwriting. When someone asked what I wanted him to wear, I could speed only to the closet. Blue shirt with the button that never wanted the hole and never got it, but always asked the slacks that make his calves look like his mother's family when they go to church. I did not put his ring in my pocket. The plate with the lemon stayed on the dresser like a joke you keep telling even after you've been told it was mean the first time. I heated soup and tasted none of it, and the bowl made the sound on the counter that bowls make when they mean to be used. The refrigerator hummed, and the light inside, when I opened it, was that wrong blue that new bulbs admit like a personality trait they cannot help. I stood for a full minute with the door open and felt like I was witnessing machines at a vigil. A text from Kellen, the clinic administrator, came through. "Take a week. Do not look at your email. If someone calls you from the city, tell them to talk to me." He was trying to make me feel managed in the right code. Then a second line from him, "We'll make a meal train." I had a sudden deep loathing for the phrase, a loathing that goes beyond me, and then I felt shame because the people who put things in a casserole and bring them deserve better than my word feelings. I wrote back a heart and nothing else, because sometimes emojis are the closest we have to a language that recognizes limits. I spent the evening doing nothing in the shape of chores. I wiped a counter. I put 3 forks in a drawer and a spoon in the rack, and then moved it to the drawer where spoons want. I unfolded the towel and then folded it the wrong way to see if the wrong way would feel true now that nothing else did. I kept moving my mug an inch closer to the edge of the table and then bringing it back because I suppose the edge wanted a say. When the streetlight outside click changed, the shadow of the blind S cord swung along the wall in a neat straight line that reminded me of a metronome. I can pick up a metronome tick from rooms away, even in other people's houses. It both soothes and enrages me. The next morning there was frost on the inside of the bedroom window, the kind that looks like a map of a country you cannot find now. When the defroster on the space heater kicked on, it made a smell like hot dust that took me back 27 winters. Tom's side of the bed sunk a little in the middle. I put the quilt on the line of the headboard to air it, because that was the kind of sentence my grandmother said, and I have always been compelled to carry phrases into rooms to see whether they'll take. Midday I went to the plant, because the HR woman with the careful eyebrows had hinted it might matter to be seen and designated. The gate guard let me through without my needing to sign the book, but he turned it anyway, as if to flip the page would get the day to move. Inside the fence, forklifts beeped again. Someone was teaching a newer one how to obey. A compressor at the edge of the mixing floor clicked. That click is as crisp as ice in language you can call home. I stood for a moment by the schedule that showed shifts. Tom's name was still there. The W on his last name looked more like a set of waves when you had not slept enough. The sympathetic looks came in 3 categories that all nurses recognize: the practiced, sincere, tidy eyes, nods a right-word storehouse; the panicked, grief at a respectful angle; and the cruelly cheerful, humor because grief makes shallow water flee to depth. I saw the second more than the first. Men clapped my shoulder too hard and I let them. A woman I know only as Pat with the boots squeezed my hand and said in a voice like a field, "He made my inventory day not stupid." I felt more saved by that than by any of the words with edges. On Tom's locker door, 3 receipts were taped with yellowing corners. One was for 2 participation pins for a safety day. One was for a round of sodas earlier in the month from the vending machine, his handwriting over the top. IOU to Andy, forgot wallet. The last had a date from autumn, a note in the same lazy long-leg letters he made when he didn't expect anyone to read them. Call plumber if hose bib runs brown again. I took that one down and put it in my pocket like a found object at a yard sale. You bring the things home you don't know you're going to need. At the funeral home, the man in the brown tie told me words in a sentence that starts, "We're looking at," and ends with numbers. Numbers are fine. I like numbers because they leave so little bare. But the picture he gave me to choose from had the wrong lighting. It made all their flowers look like apologies. I pointed at the plainest thing. He nodded as if I had told a doctor what I could bear. "Service," he asked, without the indefinite article, and the way he used that word made me think of napkins. Family only, I said. He made a note. Every time he wrote, his pen tip made the noise on paper that you hear near a hospital bed when you are at the part of the story that isn't the body's work anymore. On Thursday, a child on our floor skated in socks down the hall and hit the baseboard at the end and laughed until he cried. His laugh made the exit sign strobe. He ran past my door and I caught the thick spring smell that gets into children's shirts. I stood with the door opened a little and watched the hallway. A neighbor set a plastic tub down outside their door like an altar, as a place for people to leave a card or a thing. I hate the way death makes the hallway into a kitchen. A card appeared with a storm cloud drawing on it. The drawing made me want to walk downstairs to the river, but the advisory was back and the city asked us not to play in its yard. Someone slipped a loaf of bread into a paper bag and left it on the tub with a note. Warm. The bread was in a sleeve that had the groceries logo printed in dull blue. When I picked it up, it was indeed hot in places in a way bread rarely is unless you look for it. At night, the whisper came again. A breath, not from my chest. This time, I counted the edges of the sound. There is the sound of air moving. There is the sound of air moving through something. There is the sound of that sound touching fabric. This was the second and third. It moved by my ear and then settled into a cadence I recognized in a way I didn't want to. For years, Tom's inhalations would end with a tiny catch. Not a snore. The end of a line, a shy period. In this whisper, however it wrote itself into the room, there was that. I lay on my side with my fist under my cheek and said nothing, because saying anything calls a thing by a name. In the morning, boil water advisory. Extended for Bankside South, repair of valve sets delayed by staffing. Out of an abundance, the words mattered less and less when they were careful. The faucet ran at a sulk. I boiled water and poured it into the brown bottle we brought, and the plastic made the little sigh bottle plastic makes at 100 Celsius. Mara came and sat and ate an orange at my table, and I watched her hands. Oranges smell like the last attempt to ask the world to be polite. She filled the sink halfway to wash a dish, and the water made its shimmering fence. She turned off the tap, and the little beaded edge held and then gave. She looked at the beads and said, "Do you remember when we were little, and Mom said beads like that were the way water tells us where it prefers to end?" "She lied to us constantly," I said. "Not the academic kind of lie, but the necessary one." "She taught us mechanical kindness," Mara said. We both turned to the refrigerator then, as if it would contradict us. It hummed. Friday's shift whistle at the plant didn't to sound at noon, because there are days when even the common voices are shy. I walked to the river. The path had a taped advisory across it, but the joggers and the dog people had held it aside like a shower curtain. The river was at its corrective brown. My face wanted to be in the wind, the way it wanted to face heat from the oven when cake is done. A man near the bridge was fishing like a child, with no license, and nothing at the end that would make sense to a fish. He held his can of worms with his elbow against his side. A series of gulls took turns on the lamppost. There was a list taped to the little kiosk with the map that said watch times for spillway release. The handwriting was someone's idea of neat, and the paper wore the stains of hose water and somebody's coffee. I read through the neatness to the thing it mocked. We schedule what we can. When I came back up the stairs, the stairwell smelled like soaps you remember from bathrooms you went to when other people's mothers bought them. I held the rail and counted the metal screech as my hand hit the little metal bracket that doesn't hold the rail to anything. In the second floor landing, a man had set a crate of jars. In the crate was a bowl of keys. The keys, dull with use, smelled faintly like men. People think metal has no smell. Keys do. Somebody had put a sticky note on the crate. Male missorts. Look here. I was grateful for the way a building had invented a place to solve a problem. The note's letters had been pressed down so firm, they made the paper an object, not a message. The voicemail from the funeral home asked about the processional route because the city had changed their roadwork plan. The route felt too big. I told the woman to go the way she wanted, and she apologized for asking me a question I should not have to answer. And I forgave her because she had given me a choice. I could say, "You choose too." And choices like that make you feel like your hands are still your hands. On Saturday, a grocery truck broke down on the corner. The driver's radio bled into my kitchen window. The man's voice moved through the channels of the scanner like it was learning how to become a bird. "Copy," someone said. "10 out," someone said. The forklift on the back of the truck did its beep and beep again, like locating a body. The driver's breath could be heard because the microphone was immodest. There is something about strangers breathing that turns you into an animal without consent. I slept that afternoon because my body took pity on me. In the sleep, I put my hand out and touched a fabric that remembered being on a person. When I woke, the house made the sound houses make when they wish their people were in them. The clicks softened. The refrigerator smoothed its gears like a mouth that doesn't want to wake a baby. A neighbor's radio caught the station clean. A man outside shouted an apology for a car that did or did not belong to him. A child yelped. A bike brake agreed with someone's hand. The traffic light on Hollow Pike hiccuped. A bus brake bled air and then forgave its driver. It was one of those moments when you understand that you can live in the world and it will still send you the instruction manual in small bits. Late morning, I found the receipt from the day in the thrift store for those mugs and the towel on the counter instead of under the key tray. It flapped slightly under the breath of heat that comes from under a kitchen sink when the building warms itself. I had not put it there. Even if I was sick with grief and awful at remembering, I had not put it there. The receipt's ink had smudged where my hand had been earlier. The top of the receipt, Pottery X2, Textile X1, made a tidy record. On the back, a greasy fingerprint crossed where I had touched it the day the clerk had bagged the towel by rote. The receipt faced the part of the counter we never use. It looked like an invitation the world had written that I had not made out loud. I picked it up and put it under the tray. As if I could shut that door. The mug I had used in the morning had dried and left its ring. The ring looked like a cheap eclipse, and it made the skin between my eyes move. I wiped it, and the circular ghost stayed. When the mail came, the postmistress knocked. She leaned her head into the stairwell and said, "Sorry about," and left the word off, as if the absence of a noun was better than bringing a noun near to me. She handed me 2 bills and a postcard from a cousin we don't answer. The postcard showed a town with water as its main feature, the kind you go to for 3 days in August because you want to call yourself traveling. There too was tucked a folded thing, a letter from the plant. The envelope was thin, the paper inside was thick. It said with a template and a few left spaces, the words that make work into family for a second: regret, condolences, appreciated, valued. The plant S logo in the corner made me feel mocked, and I threw the paper away and then retrieved it because someone had typed that and someone else had signed it and a third person had lifted the pen and then put it down to make a small dot at the end of Tom S. name. The dot was a person. I wanted to keep the dot. On Sunday, I sat on the stoop for a while. The stoop gives you a view of people pretending they are not in your story. A boy with a skateboard let it out and hopped on like a musician finding his own song. A woman in blue passed with a tote bag that had the Clinic S logo, and I wondered if she had been given it as part of a wellness thing I did not have enough money to do. The smell from the laundry vent down the block washed the street and rose and fell like a tide. Somewhere down by the river, the city released water on purpose. The lift gate made its little metallic scream. I looked at my hands. When you cannot bear your body, your hands that touch everything are still accessible to gratitude. They did what I asked. That night, which began as if it promised nothing, I woke to a new sound in the bathroom. The faucet had not been left to drip, but water was moving, the kind of sound from a hose when a neighbor opens a spigot and both of you feel like you re-pulling from the same person. I sat up and listened hard enough. I made the room smaller. It stopped and then it started again, a slow thread. I went to the sink. It was off. I went to the tub. It was damp, not long wet, but recently wet. I bent and put my fingers on the porcelain, and my skin agreed with a narrow, chilling fact. Water had moved. The faucet mouth had a tiny bubble on it, like a mouth that had chosen not to say something. In the mirror, my face had the color we give to cheap bread. I turned everything and turned them back, and there was nothing to do. I stood in the hall and heard the stairwell C fluorescent make a sound like a bad violin. I stood by the door and saw the shadow line that meant a person had passed the light at the end of the hall and stood there. I put my hand on the knob because it is both a weapon and a handshake. I did not open the door. The breathing came again at my back, and I turned and it walked to the bed without me. What I did next is what people do when their minds need a job. I cleaned a mug. I folded a towel. I put the receipt under the key tray again. I rearranged the magnets on the fridge to put the lighthouse where a person would use it to hold such things. I made a list of things like I always do after a fog. Monday, trash, sign the form at clinic, call mortgage. Tuesday, towels, plants. Wednesday, call the man about the radiator, ask Mara about the cat she keeps telling you to adopt, like a person can pour a cat where grief has settled. On Monday, I went to the clinic in the morning to sign something and to sit in the staff room with the refrigerator hum belonging to somewhere else. Kellen's smile suffered me with decency, and I endured it. "We sent you a basket," he said. "It's nothing fancy." He apologized for calling it a basket because it wasn't a basket, it was a bag. I wanted to kiss his forehead for that small shame. The staff radio hissed, and then a voice said things and numbers and sentences that could apply to many lives. I thought about the city intentionally calling us and intentionally telling us we were all in it together. In the hallway, a printer spit out something with edges. A chart put its little square on the right line, and the paper slid into the hand of a man who believed in paper in a building the world is trying very hard to turn into an app. On the way out, I bought toothpaste. The barcode beep was the exact pitch I wanted it to be. I walked home listening to my shoes and the way they pronounce sidewalks. Scuff, scuff, circle, scuff. The mail crate by the stairs held one thing for me, a bright orange envelope from the city about hose bib checks in basements in our section. I laughed out loud. The laugh bounced off the stairwell tile in a way that made me want to apologize to the tile. "Come to the basement to check the hose spigots once this week between 8 and 2, it said. "Someone will knock." I put it on the counter lined up with the edge, because in a war, I still need to know where the edges are. In the evening, the river smelled honest. The city had done a release that afternoon, and the wonder of it is that it still happens on the kind of schedule you can learn to expect. In older places, the tide is a thing you can talk to. Ours is machinery and men taking afternoon an hour to do something ancient. I opened the window a little and then closed it because the air was too close to the wrong. I looked at the bed and made it for a person who wasn't coming, and then I sat at the table and folded my hands, because sometimes you have to tell your hands where to be, or they will tell the world instead. The daffodils dropped their heads as if embarrassed for me. The fridge hummed. The knock came the next morning while I was holding 2 towels, deciding whether to fold them differently to see if I could force the day to be a better person. I opened the door. A man in a city jacket stood there with a clipboard and cheeks red from outside. I moved to let him pass me into our small hallway. The apartment carried the smell of our 2 mugs and our 2 towels, and the faint bleach from Sunday. "Hose spigot inspection," he said. He was ordinary. The stairwell light had gone quiet again, and the man's shoes made the obliging scratch where they hit the grit. In the basement, the sinks hold the black city and the white city and everything between. The man took a look and twisted a valve. "We get air in here like a spiteful person," he said. I found a dishcloth in the basket near the machines, because all basements have a cloth, no matter what. He ran the hose for a minute and then wanted me to be the witness because people like paperwork. "Clear," he said. He signed. "They'll fix the main in spring," he said. "This is a Band-Aid." He liked the rhyme of it. He left, and I stood there with my hand on the rail and felt the building give back heat into the hand. I was too old to cry in basements. I cried anyway, in the right amount. When I came back upstairs, the breathing was waiting for me. It seemed not to have been waiting long. I walked into the bedroom and did not cross the threshold. The light from the street made a neat square in the middle of the bed, as if the city were audacious enough to look and bless. The breath kept its pattern. I counted and then stopped counting because I was already counting whether I wanted to admit it. I went to the kitchen because the body I'm stuck with craves a task when the mind is told to be quiet. I filled the kettle and turned it on, and the lid sang. I watched the traffic light at the corner give it 6-second red and 13-second green and 3-second yellow, and then I looked at the clock, and the clock told me something about how badly my timekeeping had become attached to machines. The sigh came at the exact second I poured. Not mine. The air moved in a way that made the hair on my arm do the thing it learned in middle school. I put the mug down, and it made the right ring. I pressed a finger into the ring and brought it to my face, because sometimes you have to smell your own foolishness with your nose. My finger smelled like nothing, and the towel smelled like lemon. I leaned my hip against the counter and listened. The baseboard tick went left to right in the room like a second hand on a person's face. It was as if the apartment was taking a breath for the bed. I went down the hall. The bed didn't change shape. I stood there and felt the cold for 10 seconds, the way you stick your hand in winter rain and then move away, not because you mind the cold, but because you mind the part of your body that had thought it could be warm if it wanted to be. I looked at the dresser and the plate with the lemon on it, and the ring on the lemon plate, and the receipt under the key tray, and the daffodils near their end, and the shift schedule on the fridge, the lighthouse magnet stuck in the wrong orientation now. I went back to the kitchen and turned the lighthouse to the right point toward the river. In the evening, I was the kind of tired that cannot be slept through. I lay down and heard the breath and let my eyes say bad things to me. I remembered the safety video with the title in a font that makes professional things feel like children's shows, and the way Tom had rolled his eyes and said, "They make it look like Hazard is a thing you invite to Christmas and then ask to leave." He had liked to laugh at what bosses call common sense. He could lift without being taught. The machines in him were little and numerous, mine too. The breathing made a question out of the air, and the refrigerator answered with its hard, polite paragraph. At 2 in the morning, I went to the living room and opened the window without asking the city. The outside air came in like a person you were not sure you had invited correctly. The smell of the river had been replaced by the smell of other people's heat. A siren went by, and then a second, not urgent. The traffic light counted. A man somewhere taped something to something. You can hear tape all caps across the street. In the darkness on a piece of paper I found when I put my hand down to rest it, I wrote without committing to writing or to not writing the words. I will lie where he used to warm the sheets. I will do this once. I will feel what he left. It was the best I could do. The next day, the funeral home called to say when they would arrive with the rectangle. I put the phone down and pressed my thumb to the table because small pressure sometimes persuades big things to go softer. The breathing in the bedroom had gone to that thin like thread, like a fisherman who listens to line while looking at the water. At dusk, while the river did its brown, while the men in orange on Hollow Pike held up red signs to empty air, I went into the bedroom and lifted the quilt back like you do when you are certain your own limbs will be offended by the day if you don't give them the smallest kindness. The sheets were cold under my legs. The cold leapt into my calves and up and made itself a new longing. I lay where he lay with my back to the room and faced the wall like a person who obeys where they are told to look. I put my hand where his hand used to make any mattress feel solid. I listened. The breath came and then it didn't. What I heard then was the radiator, the apartment's slow engine clicking left to right. I lay and discovered what renewers of houses and men at the river and people with room temperature instruments all know. There is the cold of objects, and there is the cold from inside bodies. And when you lay down and decide to admit you know the difference, you can go a long way down into a place where there are no words. I slept like that for an hour, and when I woke, the traffic light made the wall say yes in 3 colors. The morning was a day. The men came and wore their difficult shirts and their professionally solemn faces, and out of dates and duties, carried Tom away. The refrigerator hummed at the exact moment they lifted. It felt like a joke and a ritual, and I wanted to tell it to someone, and I wanted to strike the refrigerator with my hand. In the quiet, after there were words to take my mind. The funeral home needed a signature. The clinic needed to know if the meal train should shift a day. The plant sent a message that said memorial at the flag in front at noon on Friday if weather. A woman from the city wanted to know if she should come look at the basement again, and I couldn't tell if this was official or kind. The water had returned to being the ordinary disappointment. In the afternoon, an old man from 2 doors down knocked with a flashlight in his hand, asked if my hallway light gave me trouble. "If you need the stair brought back to true," he said, "I have a way of speaking to these." He lifted the flashlight like a ribbon in a parade. The last sound that mattered came on a day that would have been a day anyway. The fridge hummed its hum. The river smelled like river. The self-check beeps at the grocery lied to me about the goodness of human life. I brought home a loaf of bread and put it on the counter, and the counter held it. I folded a towel to see. I unfolded it. The phone lit with the shift schedule I kept on Tom's phone because I couldn't bring myself to change it. The bleep has become my prayer. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, and the clean rectangle lay on the bed because the funeral home had made the air just a little neatened. The breathing did not come. The apartment breathed a little and then didn't, and I waited and then I didn't. When sleep came, it came as it might to a person whose breath learned a new sentence. He is not coming back. And the quiet in the bed is the quiet of a room, not the quiet of fingers lying beside you. But I have learned all the noises of our apartment. I have learned the pitch of the refrigerator and the timing of the baseboard heater and the minute when the light outside clicks whether or not it likes us. I know the intervals. The traffic light on Hollow Pike holds on yellow when it is too cold to be anyone's business. I can hear the stairwell fluorescent begin to die long before it considers doing it for me. I know the smell of hose water and when to pour it out onto the floor of the basement and when to run it a second longer for mercy. The receipts curl when they're tired. The mugs hold their rings without asking for forgiveness. The towels want to be folded honestly. I can live in a city where the men send messages about out of an abundance and do not write exactly what the chemical was, and I can tell myself that what we have together is a web, not a chain. And sometimes, when the street is empty and the light measures the apartment will give me that whisper for 5 breaths, and I will lie where the bed remembers him, and the sheets will offer me their cool, and I will let the machine that runs me shift its weight and do its job without my supervision. Then I get up and make tea. I wash a mug and dry it with the wrong side of the towel. I press my thumb to the receipt stuck under the tray and feel the little ridge where the printer put the date and then folded the paper to make it into an object. I will keep the plant's letter with the dot at the end. I will keep the tap's little bubble as a story. I will keep the exit sign S-hum as a religion I attend when no one is looking. The air in the apartment does not need my permission to move anymore, and I have learned not to give it. When the city tells me to watch, I watch. When it asks me to wait, I wait. When the refrigerator hums, I hum a note under it and let that be my house.